Hi guys, it's Shar. Welcome back to my channel, Crafting Up a Storm. Today I'm in a collaboration video for 5 Easter projects under $5. I'll bring you more information about that collaboration in my video, but I'm excited to bring you these projects. They're obviously inexpensive, they are unique, and they're perfect for your Easter tiered trays or small vignettes. Let's get crafting. On my first project, I used 3 of the wooden rabbit ornaments from Dollar Tree. I think they come in a pack of 14. And I used 3 of them. I glued them together with some wood glue. You can use hot glue, but to me it's very thick and I don't get a good adherence. I wanted this to look basically just like the wooden ornament, just thicker. So I wanted a good tight bond. So I spread the wood glue in between and cleaned up any wood glue that came out of the edge. And then once that's done, I will just put a clamp on it and clamp those together and let it dry. Now I'm going to use a plastic lantern from Dollar Tree. I found this in the garden department. I'm going to try and cut the top off. I started with a straight edge, but that didn't do the trick. So I'm going to use a little hacksaw and take that very top piece off with it has a loop and a ring on it. I'm going to cut that off. Now I'm going to go in with my straight edge and just cut off the excess plastic ring that was left. Just be very careful doing this. Always cut away from you and make sure your fingers are out of the way. And I just cut that little excess ring off and then sanded it down with my sanding block to make it smooth. I added a coat of Waverly Ivory chalk paint. This will give a good solid base layer and it takes away the shine of the plastic and allows me to put some distressing paint on it later. I didn't worry too much about the inside. I just painted the top and the sides and the bottom as best I could. Now I'm going to paint my little rabbit statue that I made and I'm going to paint it the same colors. With these ornaments, the outside edges are a lot darker from where the wood was burnt cut, and so I did that with a couple of layers of paint. Now I'm going to go in with the Waverly truffle, and I'm just dry brushing. I'm taking a lot of the paint off, but I'm going to dry brush around the edges. I'm going up the side and around the edges of the top and just distressing it to make it look like an older vintage antique lantern. Adding some texture to it. And then of course I'll do the same thing with that rabbit stack of wood pieces that I made so that they match as well. And I'll just go around the edges and distress and add some good texture to the rabbits as well. That way they're cohesive. Once that's done, I'm going to glue my rabbit to the top of the lantern. There's still a hole. You can fill it in, but I wanted to leave the hole so some of the light could come through. I put some hot glue on the feet, the front feet and the back feet, and there is a seam on this lantern. I just went parallel with the seam and glued those bunnies down to the top. So the top of the lantern now is these bunnies. I'm using some plastic roses from Dollar Tree. I would normally not use these. They're very plasticky, but they went perfect with this lantern. And so I just clipped off the individual flowers, and I went through and added a little bit of glue to each stem, and I put a stem in on one side, and then I turned it and I put a stem in on the other side, and I turned it and I added until I had as many flowers as I wanted. I just kind of glued it around. There's a light in the middle of that lantern, and I just glued around the edge of that and filled it in with flowers. And then I went back with some of the leaves and added those, and this is how it turned out. Very cute, very easy. For this next project, I'm going to take 2 of these Dollar Tree styrofoams, and it's called a Styro Wonder Cutter, and it's to help you cut styrofoam. There's 2 batteries in this canister, and when you turn the switch to on, it heats this wire, and you can cut through styrofoam like butter. Now, I have had this forever, and I bought it at my local craft store. I did go on Amazon, and if you just look up hot wire styrofoam cutter on Amazon, there are a ton to choose from, a lot better than this. There's sets that come with a hot pin and a larger wire, and they range from as low as maybe $10 up to the average is about $30. And then of course you can get some really expensive sets, but if you do a lot of styrofoam cutting, even for floral, this makes it so much easier. But you do not have to cut these. The cone shape, we're going to make carrots out of this, so the cone shape can be your carrot shape just fine. I know that styrofoam can be difficult to cut without something like this, but you don't have to cut it. I just wanted to kind of take it down and make it a little more of a chunky carrot. I wanted to thin out the sides a little bit and make the end a little more pointed. Add some texture to it, and then I went around the top like this and rounded it. Now here I'm taking the cutter and I'm just making some slashes like a carrot may have. It's not necessary. Looking back after I was finished, I accomplished the same thing using paint. You don't have to use this. I don't think it added enough to it. I'm now going to paint these, and I used 3 different orange paints. That one is Ceramcoat Pumpkin, and then I used a Ceramcoat Cantaloupe, and for the darker orange I used an Anita's all-purpose acrylic in just orange. So really, if you just have 3 different shades of orange that go together, you'd be fine. To be honest, if you just painted them orange, you'd be fine. But I painted them with a medium orange color, and now I'm going to go in with the darker orange and hit some of those divots to make some of those indentations a little darker. And then I'm going to go in with the lighter orange, and I'm going to hit some of those highlights. And I just think it gives it a little depth. I don't think it's absolutely necessary to have the three colors, but I like to give it a little bit of depth. make it more realistic carrot than just one solid color. But in the end, I think you'd be fine just painting it a medium orange. Once I went in with my darker and my lighter color, I wanted to go in with a brown paint, and I used Waverly Truffle with a very thin brush. And here I'm just adding those lines that carrots have. And I just put some paint on my brush and started making slashes randomly here and there until the paint ran out. And then I went back and got more so that I had a variety of shades of brown all over. And I made those lines everywhere. This is why those slashes really didn't make a difference. I'm just kind of going in to give it that line and texture. Now these are great. They're bright and they're wonderful, but they're a little too cartoony for my decor. So once I'm done with this, I'm going to go in with another top coat that's just going to kind of soften this color a little bit. That's kind of why the 3 different colors of orange aren't absolutely necessary, because I'm gonna now go in with some I believe it's Cashew Waverly chalk paint, and I'm just taking a very thin layer on my fan brush, and I'm gonna go over the top and just give it a good coat of this thin layer, and it's going to soften these colors quite a bit and make it look a little more realistic rather than kind of the bright colors. Depends on what you want to use them for. You can leave them this orange, but I just distressed it with this ivory paint on the top, and it kind of came out looking like some chunky wood carrots. I'm just going in and hitting all those highlights and just adding this very thin film. Now I have this foliage from Dollar Tree. I used pieces of it on another project, but I still had plenty to go in, and I split it in 2, and I just poked it in the very top of each carrot so that I had greenery at the top of my carrots. And these just, they look perfect. They're a plastic leaf. Now you can tie them together with twine, you can add them to a sign, you can do whatever you'd like with them. I wanted to be able to use them individually on a tiered tray, face them differently, so I left them separate. But I'm going to take this piece of, this is a packaging that I had from another project, and I'm just going to cut out a rectangle and I'm going to make a tag. If you have tags from Dollar Tree or from Hobby Lobby, you can use it, but I'm just showing you that you don't have to. I'm just cutting a tag down, and I'm just going to keep cutting until I have the shape I want. And this cost me nothing. So I have a nice tag shape, and I will use one of those wooden rabbits as well. My tag is pretty small, so I'm going to put the rabbit to the back of my tag. And I will go in and make a hole in the top of my tag with a hole punch real quick. And then to decorate my tag, I'm going to just take a thin black Sharpie and go around the edges with some lines and dots, and go all the way around the edge of the tag. Very simple, very easy, not perfect. Just going around the edge, and a line and a couple of dots, and a line and then one dot, and then a line and a couple of dots. And then I will write in bunny bait. on my tag. So you don't have to have a Cricut, you don't have to have stencils. You can just, especially if you're writing in this kind of tall, thin way, if you just write, it doesn't have to be perfect, and that's what makes it homemade. And then I just glued my tag onto the top of that little wooden rabbit, and I didn't paint the rabbit, I just left it the raw wood, and I glued it to the top, and then took a piece of twine, and it was an extra piece of twine from something else I had gotten, an ornament I had gotten, and I just tied it around one of the carrots. Very easy, very simple. Sorry, I'm a little bit out of frame, but I think I'll move it in a minute. And there's our tag. And here's how our carrots turned out. This video is part of the 5 projects under $5 collaboration, and this month's theme is Easter. Our hosts each month are Emily at Farm Charm Chic and Missi at Crafty Cove. And this month's guest host is Tammy at Happiness Created. I will leave a link to their channels and the playlist in the description. You'll want to watch all of them because it is a talented group of DIYers. For my next project, I will be using an extra jar I had at home. It's a small pesto jar. I'm going to clean the label off with Goo Gone and make sure all that sticky part's off and clean it up, and then I'm going to paint it with Waverly chalk paint in Pool. If you have an extra jar, feel free, use it, that way it's free, but they also have some jars at Dollar Tree for $1.25. I added that price to my list in the project list. I'm going to cover it with a couple coats of this blue Pool paint, and then I'm going to go in and I'm using Waverly chalk paint in cashew and hazelnut and truffle, and a chalk paint in French linen. And I'm just sprinkling all sorts of little dots all over. I found that if I used a short, thick brush and watered the paint down, I got a really good flick to it. And I'm just putting it on one side and flicking all the colors and then letting it dry and putting it on another side. Once I'm done with that, I'm going to wrap some twine around the lip of the jar. With all these speckles, it looks a little like a robin's egg. That's the look I was going for. I'm going to put some twine around the neck to cover the top of my little planter. And I just keep wrapping the twine around until I covered as much as I wanted to on it. I'm using Dollar Tree twine. Once I was done, I made a bow. I wanted to make a triple loop bow. So I wrap it around my fingers at least 3 times. And then I take the end and I go through my 2 fingers all the way, front to back. And then I come back around and that leaves a loop at the top. I'm going to cross my string over the loop and then go back through the loop toward the top finger and pull tight. And I'm just going to make sure that the knot is equal in between all the loops around my finger. I think I had 4 loops. And I'm just going to continue to tighten it. And that makes an easy multiple loop bow. There's many tutorials on it. I learned it from Gina K on Gina K Designs. And if you just look up bow with Gina K, you'll find it. And I just make sure it's tightened and the loops are straightened, and I'm going to glue that to the front of my jar. I left the ends of this bow very long because I'm going to take some of those wooden ornament bunnies and I'm going to add it to the bottom of my end pieces. Just make sure my bow is glued down well. And now I had already painted these bunnies white previously, so I'm going to trim the ties off, but I'm going to leave a good length. And they're going to kind of become like a charm on the end of each twine. I already painted the front of them white, so I'm just going to glue them down to that twine. I have some tulips. I bought these at the 99-cent only store. They had some really pretty blue and some yellow. I'm going to clip them apart. And I believe I take most of the leaves off. And what I found was easiest was to make a bunch or a bouquet in my hand and arrange it with the leaves how I wanted. Once I had everything kind of in place, I took some twine and I just wrapped the wires at the bottom so that everything kind of stayed together. Now you can use styrofoam in the bottom of your jar as well, and that way you can arrange it in that manner. It's such a small jar, just wrapping it with the twine and holding it together worked. And I added a few more leaves in, and there's the end result. Very simple, great for small arrangements. This next project is probably my favorite. I used 2 of the ornament eggs from Dollar Tree. I believe they come in a pack of 8. 6 or 8, I can't remember. And I just filled in the holes. And then I took 2 craft sticks. I painted the ends white. On 2, I went down a little further and made them a little longer. These are going to be bunny ears, so I made them a little longer on one side. And then the other side I painted, this is Anita's acrylic craft paint in Coral Cove. It's got a little pink to it, so it makes it a little coral, not quite orange, but a more coral orange. And I painted the other ends. Then I used some petal pink paint, and I wanted to put a stripe for the middle of our bunny ears. And I just painted a line down the middle, made it a little wider at the top. Nothing fancy. Once that was dry, I wanted to cut those. I like to score those first and then cut them. It makes a good clean cut. And then I took our eggs and I went down about 3 inches with one, a little less than 3 inches with the other. I scored it and cut it. One of them I didn't cut exactly straight across. I went off at a little bit of an angle so it would sit a little differently. But I wanted them not to be exact. I gave it a good scoring. And it cut pretty easy. So now we have our 2 pieces. One I will paint with Waverly chalk paint in maize. And the other I will paint with Waverly chalk paint in white. One will be a little chickie and one will be a bunny. And now that I have our pieces all dry, I'm gonna assemble them. The little coral pieces will be our little chickie top knot. Those little top feathers. And I just kind of place them together but at an angle. And I glue them together that way. And our bunny, I want the bunny ears to one of them to sit a bit at an angle, give them a little character. And I hot glue them together. Once that's done, I'm going to go in with a very small paintbrush and some black acrylic paint and just paint 2 little wonky ovals. Those will be our eyes. And I do the same thing on our bunny. They don't have to be perfect. Just touching the paintbrush down and kind of dragging it a little bit will make a little oval. They have more character when they're not perfect. Then I go in with some pink, that petal pink again, and I make a nose for our bunny. Just a small upside down triangle. And then for our chickie, I'm going to go in with that same coral and I'm going to make a little bit of a beak. So it's going to be kind of the same shape, just a little larger as our bunny nose. And a little more rounded off. Once I was done with that, I used the packaging from I think it was from the styrofoam bunny, but any packaging will do, anything clear. And I'm going to use it to write my words on the top of. This helps me practice and know exactly where I want it to be. So I'm going to lay this down on top of my chickie. And then I'm going to use my Sharpie and write, I believe I wrote Peep on my chickie. And this helps me where I can practice it and line it up and see exactly where I want it to start and how tall I need it to be without first writing on the wood. And I go in and I just trace it in, and this allows me, once I have it written, I can kind of move it if I feel like it needs to be not so close to the edge. And then I could look from the beak down and see where I want this to start and how tall I want it to be. Now I feel comfortable writing right onto my chickie. So I can go in with those tall, easy letters and write Peep. I do write it and then I go back later and go over the top of it just to darken it a little. Once I have that done, I'm going to go around the edge with those little lines and squiggles and dots I think it adds character and gives it a good outline. And I'm just going to go around the whole edge. Little squiggle line, couple dots, little squiggle line, and 3 dots. I just vary the number of dots each time. And I'll go around the edge, and then I'll also go around the little top feathers. And then I'll go around the little tiny beak. I know I'm out of camera shot here, but I'm just going around the little beak. Now, I do get out of camera here. I'm so very sorry, but I'm riding Hop on my bunny. And I promise it will move up where you can see better in just a second. I'm going to go around the edge of that bunny as well with my little squiggle lines and dots. For the bunny, I go all the way around the edge. I also drew in some whiskers just with my Sharpie and a little hook mouth as well. And I went around the nose. For the mouth, I drew a line with a little hook on one side and a little hook on the other side. And I drew the mouth kind of off to the side. Adds a little character. I'm going to go around the edge of the ears, and then I go around the inside of the ears as well. And there they are, Peep and Hop. I do want them to stand up on my tiered tray, so I put some wood glue on one of the tower building blocks from Dollar Tree, and I added some hot glue for instant hold, and I'm just going to stick them to the back so that they'll stand up. And there they are. They're very good friends. They're super cute. For my final project, I used a wood round from Dollar Tree, and I have a helper in this one. I get the heat gun out, and there he is. He loves that sound. I'm dog sitting for my daughter, and that's her dog, Gus. So I took the galvanized letters off the front of the sign, and I also removed the paper. I'm not worried about it being good and smooth. I could have used the back of the sign, but it already had a hanger on it, and I wanted to leave that in case I wanted to hang this piece up. So I just took the paper off as best as I could and sanded the rest of it, and then wiped it with a towel. I'm going to put moss all over the top of it, so it's not a big deal. Now I'm going to cover it in Waverly chalk paint in moss. And my helper's back. He always wants to see what's happening and what I'm doing. There's Gus. So I wanted the back of the sign to be covered in this green color just in case any of the moss peeks, if there's any of the sign that peeks through the moss. I didn't want you to see brown. I wanted to be able to see green on the back. So I covered it in the chalk paint. Next, I'm going to use some wood glue and put a layer down and add some reindeer moss on the top. I just smoothed it out with a spatula. I probably did 1/3 at a time. This wood glue gives you plenty of time to work with it. it stays wet well, but I didn't want everything to be too sticky. I took the moss and just kind of broke it up a little bit and wanted all the small pieces to fit on there. And I just started covering it everywhere. And I would clean up any of the little particles and just put it over the top of it. Just trying to make everything stick. I went in with this flat spatula, but later I noticed that this acrylic block worked better. So I covered it as much as possible, and then I went back and make sure I got all the edges around the top. And just made sure it was good and filled in. Now I'm going to take one of these styrofoam bunnies from Dollar Tree, and I want to cut it in half, and it's not an easy task. I did try and use my styrofoam cutter. It's just not quite big enough. Some of those other styrofoam cutters from Amazon, and I may have to pick up one, would do a much better job. This, I just couldn't get it to fit. So I used it as much as I could in like the ears and the face and toward the back of it. But the rest of it, I had to use just a good long knife. Now be extremely careful with it. Styrofoam's not easy to cut, and you don't want to get any cut fingers. But I just kept working at it little by little. I would go in one side, and I noticed that if I just put the knife in and kind of pulled it down, I got a little bit of leeway on it, or a little headway on it. Just takes patience. Little by little, I got it finally cut in half. Going in from one end and then going in from the other end, and just back and forth. Just be very careful and keep fingers out of the way. And there it finally came in half. And I noticed that the ear on this half, which is the half I wanted to use, had a hole in it. However, I took care of that with a little of the Dollar Tree spackling and filled in that hole. And you can't even tell. Once I finished with that and it dried, I covered it in Waverly white chalk paint, and I must have put 3 or 4 good thick coats on it. I really wanted to take away that styrofoam look. I just let it dry in between all the coats. Once it was good and dry, I used some Waverly Ivory chalk paint, and I went into all the nooks and shadows and crannies and tried to build up some dimension. I went in with cashew next, and that really started to add some of those shadows and bring out the features for this bunny. You could go around and see the leg better, and it brought out a lot of the shadow you can see. Anywhere where I wanted it to deepen and bring out some of that shadow around the edge, I put in this cashew paint. To add the last bit of dimension, I used some Waverly chalk paint in Elephant. I wanted to go a little more gray with this distressing, maybe a little more stone-like. So I really went into the edge and those shadows with this gray paint. And I would go in and do some, and then I would maybe wipe it a little bit with a towel to smooth it out a bit. And I just kept going back in, putting in paint and then wiping it if I got a little heavy-handed, until I got to where I wanted. A couple of areas, if I got a little too heavy-handed, I went in with a Q-tip. If it was in a crevice kind of around the neck, I went a little thick, and I went in with a Q-tip and kind of blended that out a bit but I just kept adding dimension until I got it to where I wanted it to look. Really brought out those features on this bunny. Once it was good, I put it up on that wood round sign with the moss to see exactly where I wanted it. And I wanted the backside to kind of maybe hang off just a little bit. I paid close attention to where the hanger was so that if I wanted to hang it up, I could, and it would be straight. So I made sure my bunny was parallel with where my hook was at the top. And I'm going to add in some Dollar Tree lavender. I cut all of the flowers off and then lined them up where I wanted the florals to be. I took all the leaves off so that they would lay flat. And then before I glued them down, I wanted to take the bunny and make sure everything was gonna lay correctly. Then I just covered it in hot glue just to make sure they were all gonna stick and that they stuck down to that moss, all the stems. And then I went back in with some leaves while the glue was still hot, and I added those in. And that way, I clipped them apart, and they were more flat, and they sat better. Then I glued on the bunny. Same way, just put a lot of hot glue down and stuck that bunny on. And then of course I went back in and added leaves to the edge of the bunny, and that's how he came out. Very pretty. Can sit on a shelf or can hang up. So enjoyed being part of this collaboration, and I hope you enjoyed these crafts. If you did, hit the like button and consider subscribing to my channel. Please make sure to go in and watch all the other creative DIYers on this playlist. Thank you, and as always, keep crafting. Bye-bye.